Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us online today, and welcome to SCMP Education webinar. My name is Douglas Parks, an editor at SCMP, and I'll be your host. Today's topic is strategies and tips for getting your child into their dream university. Selecting a university is one of the most important life decisions for a high school graduate. There's a broad range of factors to consider, including location, academic quality, choice of majors, and much more. Key questions we'll be tackling today include: how difficult is it for Hong Kong students to get into overseas universities? What key factors do application teams look for? What do students need to include in their applications? And how much do extracurricular activities count when weighed against academic scores? Our guests today include Berina Chan, Higher Education Counsellor at ESF South Island School, Martha Devries, Further Education Counsellor at ESF Renaissance College, and Stuart Redden, Teaching and Learning Advisor Post-16 of the English Schools Foundation. And this webinar would not be possible without the generous support of the English Schools Foundation. Before we start, please feel free to type any questions you have in the Q&A box at any time during the webinar, and we'll try to address them after the panel questions. Berina, I'd like to start with you. How much does it matter the subject that a student studies at university? For instance, if they're interested in history of art and the parent thinks law is perhaps a better career choice, is that important which one they take?
So I think depends on which country. In the UK, they're less flexible with you changing major after first year. But obviously for something like law, you can always do it as a postgraduate from whichever country or you want to work in later on or live in. But in Canada and US, it's more flexible. I have some friends, we call them first year majors because they're trying every single subject until they find something they're passionate about and want to declare their major in it and continue doing it for the next 3 or 4 years.
I would just echo what Berina said. I think in some parts of the world there can be a lot of flexibility. So what you go into as you start university, you might have some ability to move about. But I do think it's really important for students and parents to consider what the student really enjoys learning about and what the student really feels a passion about. Most young people these days will not enter a career and stay in that career for their lifetime. So a foundational university degree can take students lots of different places. So you could have your first degree in art history and then study something completely different later in life and do a job completely unrelated to art history. So, and for many students, especially in ESF schools who are looking to go abroad, we know that their first degree won't be their final degree. So I think it's really important for students to choose something to study that is really going to engage them, especially if they're going to some place like the UK where there is not that flexibility.
Stuart, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really, really important that a student has a course that matches their ability and their interest. I remember when we were setting a program up with the Hong Kong Academy for the Performing Arts, and I could see the students there were really enjoying the class, and I spoke to the students afterwards, and one of the students told me he'd been in the second year of a business degree and realised it was the wrong thing for him, and now he was following the performing arts. And that's a wide course as well. There's many things in terms of coaching people, performing arts, event management, communication skills, etc. So the students succeed in their area of interest and their ability if it really is their vocation.
Great. So once a student has decided on the subject they wish to pursue, how do they go about identifying the university that is a right fit for them? Anyone?
Well, there's so many factors that go into making a university the right fit. Of course, course choice is very important, but a lot of students don't know what they want to study. So, for example, in the US, many students go in undeclared or undecided and have a year or sometimes even a little bit longer to finalize those decisions about what they're actually going to focus their studies on. But I think it's really important that that students spend some time exploring and take time to discover who they are and what they want in their future.
What kind of criteria do you think they should have for when they're looking through universities?
I think if you look at just a business degree, for example, some schools can vary in the different units you can do. So I think more and more people are now doing online business or entrepreneurship, and some schools don't have those units. So, or some students are also interested in marketing. So to look at each university and kind of break down, okay, what do I get to study in year 1? What do I get to study in year 4? If the schools have any internships, links with companies that they're interested in, how far away are the internships, or they might want to do an internship in another country. So so those sort of industry links, I think, are also quite important.
Stuart, Martha mentioned that like American universities, a lot of students can go and undeclared. At ESF, would you sort of try and nudge students to be more clear about what they want to do? Or if they were applying for American universities, do you feel that's okay for them to go there and find their way?
Sure, I think within our ESF schools, we have broad programs and specialised programs. We have some students that already know what they want to do. They know they want to go into performing arts or law, etc. So, you know, they've thought about that. They're sure that that's their pathway. Those kind of students exist. And then there's other students who are not sure, and we have broad pathways for those students. And I think that's about the process. Everyone kind of develops, finds their enthusiasms as they grow, and I think sometimes if you're not sure, having that flexibility is something that's very useful.
Mm-hmm. So obviously a lot of this decision rests on the student themselves, what they're interested in, which course they want to take. So how can parents help them to make the right choice? What can they do?
I think it's being very supportive. I think one of the most important things I think any of us can do is listen. Listen to what the student wants from life, ask some questions, reflect with their child as well in terms of where they want to go with the career, what they want to do, and look at, you know, some of the potential areas. I think one of the problems that sometimes we have, it's very difficult to think about the future. I think our brains don't work very well in terms of placing ourselves in the future. I think there's been a number of studies about that. So it is interesting in terms of that decision-making process about how you weigh up options and how you think about it and how you think it's going to pan out and work through some scenarios as well. I think that's a key area.
Mm-hmm. We mentioned extracurricular activities earlier, so when it comes to the application, how important are those? Because obviously I remember being told that, you know, you've got to make sure you've got extracurricular activities, things besides just your grades. Is that the case? Because I know in the UK, for example, they're much more focused purely on academics and that's what matters, whereas like America, for instance, it's a bit more broad what they look at. So what are our opinions on that?
In the US, definitely extracurriculars are much more important, but not extracurriculars for the sake of extracurriculars. Extracurriculars for the sake of identifying who the student is as an individual, what they feel really passionate about, what they will bring to the university, what kind of diverse interests they have. So I would never advise a student to choose an extracurricular activity just because they want to tick a box or add something to their resume. Choose extracurriculars that are enjoyable, that are interesting to you, that you really develop the word passion is overused, but it really is the word that fits, about your extracurriculars, so that when you are talking about the things you've done that are meaningful to you in high school, it includes those extracurricular activities that weren't just simply, you know, sitting in a club and being passively involved.
What about the value of internships for applications? Are they something that even students, you know, as young as 17 or 18 need to or should consider?
I think it's important they consider an internship for the sake of them finding out if that's the right job for them. So we've had students go off to lawyers' offices to do an internship, and they found that's a lot of paperwork. I'm not always in court debating with someone. It's not as fun as it looks like in Suits. So that for them, actually, a student came back and said, that's not for me. I don't want to be in the office all day. So that part is really interesting, and then that feeds back. If they can reflect on it, they can write really good personal statements on it to tell people why they want to be a lawyer, what's confirmed. This internship has helped them confirm that. I think that's really helpful in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for writing personal statements, any tips that we can offer students?
Showing the passion. I think as Martha just mentioned, we do overuse it, but sometimes when we read the statement, we can really see, oh, that part of history is what you're really passionate about. You know, you can write a history personal statement about Russian history, 4,000 characters, and you can't even stop, or history of anything else. But some students who are just very general were like, oh, well, you've just given me a book report on a book you've read. You haven't reflected on why you really love it, and that's what we're looking for, I guess.
I'm reminded of a student a couple of years ago who was applying to a very elite university in the U.S. wanting to study politics. And he told the story of when he was a little boy and lined up his stuffed animals and created little city-states out of them, and had his president monkey and all of these different stuffed animals who had different roles. And I mean, that shows his interest in politics from a very young age. And that was an essay that only could have his name on it. No one else could have written that. And I do think that's important. Students need to write something that if we took away their identifying notations, we would still know, oh, I know who wrote that. So I think that's important.
And moving on to face-to-face interview then, what tips can we give to students who have to have one of those, whether it is literally physically face-to-face or perhaps over Zoom or Skype, whatever these days?
I think one of the important things is to practice, because it's not something you do every day. So you have to practice, you have to develop those skills. I think another key thing that's really important about an interview is see it as an opportunity. Don't be there just to answer the questions. Be there to turn some of those questions around, subtly, not too obviously, but in terms of bringing out what you've achieved, what you can do, and your experiences. That's what I really think. Take the interview as an opportunity.
And I think it's really important for students to prepare for their interviews. Some courses like medicine, you need to go in with some very specific knowledge. If you are interviewing for a medical program in the UK, you need to know about the national health system. And a lot of our students forget that, or might not consider that they need to think about those kinds of details that they might not be necessarily familiar with. There are lots of resources. You can find resources about interviewing for specific programs in specific countries, even at specific universities. So it's very easy to find out what kinds of questions you'll be asked, and then practice what your answer will be. Have your elevator speech for why you want to be what you want to be.
We've been talking quite generally about the application processes here, but are there quite any significant differences that parents and students should be aware of between British, American, Canadian, Australian applications? Anything you feel we should highlight?
I always tell my students it's quite different. The UK, the personal statement, they're expected to see, I know what I want to study, I know I'm passionate about it, and I know this is what I want to do for now, for the rest of my life. And UK are kind of thinking you should know what you want to do at 18-year-olds, whereas US and Canada, North America in general, are more like, you're 18, come figure yourself out, do a undeclared, do first year, and change majors if you want. It's more flexible in that sense. So I think the mentality there is already quite different.
In terms of the actual mechanics of applying, there are some definite differences. Students don't like limits put on them, but if you apply in the UK, you have a very strict limit. You can only apply to 5 universities through the UCAS system. So understanding those mechanics of the application, I think, are important. Understanding that while many universities in the United States use the common application, there are many who do not. And so that means an individual application for those universities. So trying to making sure you research and understand the actual application tools that are available to students and families.
I think what Martha highlights there is really important. I think when a student's applying to university, they've got to think about the personal ecology. They've got a lot of other things going on in terms of the courses that they're studying, their ECAs, etc. When you put in any application, whether it's a job application or an application to go to a university, you're taking it very seriously. You're putting a lot of effort in. It's not carpet bombing. It is really about being precise in terms of focusing that on where you want to go with a university. And I think there is a real danger in terms of overwhelming a student if they're pushing themselves too wide. Really go for focus.
Is one application harder than the other, or is that a sort of not really how it works? More complicated, perhaps?
I don't think that they're necessarily more difficult. I think they're just different.
Okay.
I mean, all applications ask for the same general demographic information, and they ask for a lot of the same academic information, just in different ways. So I don't know that one's necessarily harder than another.
When it comes to overseas applications then, is it harder for Hong Kong students to get into overseas universities versus the sort of native students, let's say, or?
I think maybe in Hong Kong our culture is more humble. And in the personal statements, we always tell them, you have to show off, you have to tell them more about why you're so wonderful, why we should take you instead of the student beside you. And they're not very good at pushing themselves, and they feel like, oh, I'm just kind of showing off. But we need to encourage them to really tell them why they're so special. And with the humble culture, that's a bit more difficult.
I think a lot of our universities actually have Hong Kong societies. There's so many Hong Kong students studying in those universities. Yeah, I think we see a lot of Hong Kong students getting into universities overseas, and there is that support network for them there as well.
So you'd say there's no barrier to Hong Kong students studying overseas, and they shouldn't be put off?
I don't think there's a barrier, but they do have to keep in mind that many universities are highly competitive, and there's only a limited number of spaces. So it might feel like it's harder to get into those universities, but it's hard for anyone from anywhere to get into some of those universities. If students are open to a broad range of universities, then I think if a student really wants to go to Canada, to the US, to UK, there's a spot for them. It might not be at the most famous university that they've ever heard of from that country, but there is a place for them.
Do you think it's easier, or would you say it's easier then to apply for local Hong Kong universities though? Or is it just as difficult, just as competitive?
Local schools are quite competitive, especially in the most popular programs.
So what key factors do admissions teams look for then in applicants?
I would think really interest in the subject that they're going to study there, so that they can see there's that enthusiasm. I would think also, in terms of what they've done, their experience, the connections they make there. I mean, I think Martha and Berina have a lot of experience in terms of helping students out with applications and guiding them through, to include those types of things in their personal statements, so that they shine when it gets onto the the admissions officer's desk, because your kind of results and things get you from that pile down to that pile, and then it's that bit that you've got in your personal statement that will get you then the offer.
I'd like to remind the audience to feel free to type any questions they have in the Q&A box throughout the webinar. Next question is, families in Hong Kong often focus on the US and UK for overseas applications. Is that sort of still the gold standard, or what other countries should they be considering, like Australia, for example, or anywhere else?
In the past, we see a lot of Australian families will apply back to Australia, and then Canadian families will apply to Canada. But we're seeing more and more growth in Netherlands and non-Canadians applying to Canada. Some of my students are saying they're hoping to immigrate, and because with the student visa, you do get to stay in Canada for a bit until you find work.
Do
you guys see growth in other countries?
Other parts of Europe, I think, are growing.
yeah,
We've had
yeah.
students recently head to Germany, students who are interested in France. And more European countries are offering English medium instruction for full degree programs. So you could go to Italy and take a full bachelor's degree in English. Now, you would obviously probably learn some Italian while you were there, but that is becoming an option for families, and many families are finding that's a slightly more affordable option than UK or US.
I think in terms of East Asia as well, we see growth. I mean, Japanese universities now offering English courses, universities in Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore as well. Yeah.
What is it you think that's attracting a greater number of Hong Kong students to these universities? And we've also mentioned there's, in Europe now English language instruction. Is that the key factor you feel, or is it something else about the courses or what's being offered at these universities?
I mean, part of it is uncertainty with the issue of Brexit. There's a lot of uncertainty with going to the UK, and there's less uncertainty going other places in Europe. I do think affordability is a factor, and for sure, students who are looking for places to study in English where they have the opportunity to learn other languages but don't have to have the academic language of a different.
Since we're on the topic of language, we've got an audience question from Ruth Benny who asks, are students at international schools required to take English language proficiency tests? And what about local students?
Is that to enter international school like
Yes.
ESF?
Oh no, I think university.
Oh, university. So for the UK, for visa purposes, sometimes they're asked to take IELTS or TOEFL to prove their English ability. In the States, depends on your application. If you've written English as your first language, then sometimes they'll ask you to take additional tests to prove English if your SAT or ACT score wasn't at a certain level, or if your in-school English grade wasn't at a certain level. So various ways to pass these English tests.
And unfortunately, there's not a standard. Every school does it a bit differently. So you could apply to one school in the UK, and they would say, "Oh, yes, you're fine. We see on your school profile that you've studied in English. We're not worried." And you would see one down the road say, "Oh, but we need an IELTS score of 7 or something like that." So each university kind of sets their own standard, and it's really good for students and parents to do that research. And a lot of students will just say, I'm going to take the IELTS or TOEFL test just so that I have that credential. For students studying in international schools, it's not a challenging test for them. They are educated in English, so they do very well on those tests. So many will just decide, I'm just going to have it and not worry about it. What if?
Is that something you would recommend for students to go out and get that exam done?
I never recommend extra tests. I don't. It's time and energy and money, but I mean, if that makes them feel more comfortable.
So, having touched on the international options then, what about the local Hong Kong universities? Because rightly or wrongly, there's often they're seen as maybe slightly less prestigious, although I think that viewpoint's changing now. But what are the top courses on offer here in Hong Kong? What are ones that for certain students, you would recommend they look at?
I think we have a very big draw in terms of studying medicine. I mean, usually when we have our Chairman's Awards ceremony, the top achievers are going to do medicine at Chinese U or HKU. That really is a top course for our students.
But also, I think engineer, law,
Business, international business.
Global business. I think we have lots of great courses, actually.
Yeah.
It's just what the student is interested in. There's a lot of quality universities in Hong Kong. But I think some of our students are like, I've been in Hong Kong all my life. I kind of want to get out. So some of them want to try new things, but some of them are like, no, I want to stay in Hong Kong. This is my home, more comfortable. So it really depends on the student's preference, I think, and family.
And I think what Berina's talking about, a number of excellent universities here. And I think seeing some good flexibility now. I know we have some professional athletes come through our programs, and one of the students went on to the Baptist University, and that she was able to extend her degree course so she could compete in international competitions and keep up with her training regime. So I think there's a good breadth of choices and courses coming through in Hong Kong.
Do you have any advice for students who are maybe, you know, they're undecided about, oh, stay in Hong Kong, take a good course here, or go abroad, study at a good university there?
I think they could also weigh the cost of it. It's usually probably more than double the cost. Hong Kong is very reasonably priced. So if they have the luxury of a lot of money, then they could try going abroad. Hong Kong also has a lot of joint programs. So CityU has one with Columbia, HKU has with KCL in UK. So if they want to try half-half, they can always look at joint programs, but they're usually more competitive grades-wise to get in.
And most universities in Hong Kong have exchange options as well,
definitely.
where students can go spend a semester or a year abroad. And while not all of them, many of them, price is the same. I mean, obviously your accommodation prices change and you have travel expenses, but I think that's a really great option for students who aren't sure they're ready to leave Hong Kong but still want to have that international experience. It's a really good option for them.
Yeah, I think what Martha's saying is really important now. I think it's what they're comfortable with. Not everyone's an explorer, not everyone's an extrovert. Some people would just be very comfortable to stay in Hong Kong, do the studies in Hong Kong, and that's absolutely fine.
How realistic should students be with their applications? Do you advise that they, you know, shoot for the moon, you know, apply for that dream university? Because there's that line of thinking that obviously you can't get in if you don't apply. Or do you think it's actually wiser to, you know, just be more conservative about their choices? What's your opinion on that?
So as Stuart mentioned earlier, we don't want them to apply for everything, but we do want a good balance of quality applications. But we'll say shoot for your dreams, have 1 or 2 dream schools, and then do a few that's within your academic range, and then do maybe 2 or 3 that's safety. You know you're going to get in, you know the admit rate is more than 50%, you know that you have the grades for it, and they'll love to see your application and probably yank your arm off and give you an offer letter right away.
Yeah, I would actually give this exact same advice. I would never want to stifle a child's dreams, but at the same time, it's important that students have options that feel really good, but also feel a little safer.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. I would say make the majority realistic. But education's an interesting process. Time and learning and skills is never a linear graph. You know, anybody that's worked in education will see that a student can suddenly go along and then make that jump. And I think if you cut off having that reach university, you could maybe stifle that. But, you know, put it in context, you know, and it is really about focusing those applications. But I think it can be something that can motivate, can encourage a student, but the student has to realise as well, they need to keep at that level. It's not a one-off because they're going to that university is looking at them from that level. So as long as they've developed and they've not regressed to the mean and they've stayed at that level, then I think that will work for them. And I think that really is the key thing, is making sure a student goes to a university where they can benefit from the program and they can contribute to the university as well.
It's in the title of our webinar, but how would we define like a dream university for a student anyway?
I think in terms of a dream university, I would say it's a university where a student thrives. It's where they're in the right environment, they're with fellow students that share the same enthusiasm, they're really motivated in terms of what they're studying, what's happening at the university, and where it can take them in their career. I think that's where it has to work. We have to be careful. Sometimes we can tell ourselves a story about a named university, and maybe it doesn't work out right, and then it becomes your nightmare. I think that is the key there, is just thinking about, you want it to be a place where you'll be in flow, where you'll be thriving.
Is there a danger that a student's dream university isn't, or what they perceive as their dream university, isn't actually the right one for them?
I think when we talk about fit, that's part of it. sometimes it's the culture that's hard to research because the university usually doesn't publish, well, our culture is like this. You'll have to speak with students that are there, but you could like a filet o fish and I don't. So it's speaking to various amounts of students, possibly usually alumni from the same high school have usually similar mindset, or we kind of say we're in an ESF bubble where our students have our own little ESF culture, and so when they enter different schools, they'll have to find their new cliques, people they click with. So finding that cultural fit is also quite important, I think.
I think one thing students don't always consider is the school's mission statement, and I think that's a really good place to start. If your dream university's mission statement doesn't align with your core values, then that might be a clue. It would feel like a nightmare rather than like a dream.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
How important is accommodation when it comes to considering university applications? Because obviously, if you're applying somewhere like Columbia or Imperial College London, those cities come with huge, fees for accommodation. How much should that be in the minds of students when they're applying?
Well, it's something they always have to consider, I think. Where if I get into the school, where will I live? You can't live in a park in a tent, so you have to have those you have to start thinking about that early. Many universities who have campuses will offer, and even some guarantee, accommodations throughout the time that students are there, especially international students, but not all do that. So just researching those options, making sure you understand what those options are. In the US, it's very common to share a room with one or more roommates. It's very common to share bathroom space. And figuring out how would I navigate that, or would I be comfortable with that? So those are definitely things to think about. Am I going to cook for myself? Am I going to have somebody cook for me?
Yeah, we tell them to look at meal plans, if it has a kitchen, how many people are they sharing a bathroom with, because I think my colleagues know I'm OCD, so I don't think I want to be on one of those floors where 10, 20 girls share a public bathroom and then I'm in my own room. So some of them have double beds, some of them have single beds.
And that's funny because when my children were going to university, I told them to choose your house where someone is paid to clean your bathroom because your roommate will not like you if you are left to clean the bathroom. So just depends on different perspectives.
Yeah. And if they have the luxury to visit, that's really good. Some are apartment style, some are townhouse style. I went on a summer program and the hot water and the cold water was separate, and I didn't, that was my first time having a separate tap. So just being able to visit, I think, is really helpful for the students.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how important do you think it is that students visit universities? Obviously, this year with going forward, COVID-19, that's very difficult. But and obviously, if you're applying to overseas universities, it's very expensive. You might not be able to do that. But is it something you recommend? And are there any sort of good virtual tours these days?
I would highly recommend visiting universities if possible. I've had many students go say they give me a list in year 12, kind of first choice, second choice, and they come back in year 13. They're like, I'm not even going to apply because after visiting it wasn't the right vibe, or something they didn't like, or on the way they found something new and they really liked and put them on their list as a first choice. So if you have the luxury to visit, definitely visit, I'd say. But with COVID-19, a lot of schools are sending us webinars, virtual tours. They're doing a lot of that to still sell to the students.
I think a benefit of COVID-19 is universities have really upped their online game.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of information online that wasn't available 6 months ago. And so that's really a benefit for our students. But we also talk, if your family's going on a holiday, make time to include a university visit. If you're going to London, there are many universities right there, and they would happily welcome students and families on campus to do a walk around. So if possible, getting there in person is always best, but if not possible, I think the universities are really doing their best to give an experience for students online.
Yeah, and I think that thing is, if you can't visit, There's plenty of outlets where you can get a balanced view. You can go onto YouTube, see what the students are like there. You'll be able to see clips, get on social media, connect with alumni at the universities, so that you build up that picture if you can't go and visit. Obviously, visiting there, you get that whole 360 experience, and you get to walk around and interact. But if it's not there, there's plenty of things out on social media where you can do your research.
Jumping ahead a little bit here, but while we're on the topic of COVID-19, what advice can we offer to students who were looking to go to university this September? Because should they still go? Should they defer? Some universities like Cambridge have said they're going to be online until 2021. So what have you been telling your students?
I think I've been telling them mostly go if you can. For example, Cambridge has cancelled their big lectures, the 200 people ones, those will be online, but they're still doing the tutorials, so the small class sizes are still going to run. But if you're doing an art course or a dance course, I think that might be a bit more difficult online. So I think the student will have to evaluate how much they're getting from the online, and will it be really just as close? Because to be honest, a lot of first year students don't go to class after first week, and they sleep in, and a lot of the lectures are online already. So it depends on the course, I think, the subject they're doing.
And you also have to think about the time difference. Like if you have an opportunity to do 100% online with a U.S. university, that's going to be running 12 to 14 hours time difference. So that's important. I think a lot of universities are trying to develop some sort of hybrid model, though, so that students are doing some stuff online, like Cambridge, so the large groups are not together, but some stuff in person with smaller classes. And it's so hard to say. Each family has to decide what's going to be the best option for them.
I think it will be in terms of universities' interest to keep their students, so they will be looking to provide a good service, and I think they'll be open to prompts and questions and suggestions about how that can work. I think a lot of online learning that really is successful is asynchronous. It doesn't have to be a live lecture. There's recordings, there's things that you can post, there's ways of interacting that way as well. So I think just with the situation at the moment, it's hard to predict, so we've just got to watch and respond to the situation as it changes.
We'll get to our audience questions in a minute, but one last question I wanted to ask was, how useful do we feel agencies are when applying to overseas universities? Because some parents, I think, are of the opinion that you need all the help you can get, this is a useful service, or are you of the opinion that actually just doing it yourself is fine, you'll get there?
I think in terms of my opinion, why do you need them when you've got guys like these? Because these guys are very talented, very experienced. They really know what they're talking about. But I think both of them have got more detailed views on that than me. But these guys are my experts as far as I'm concerned.
I think you can be careful with some of the agencies. Some will get more money if a student registers at a certain university. So if parents do want to use their agency, they need to research where's the money coming from or how much they're paying. And some universities do say, we work with this agency closely, and that's because they don't have someone internationally to recruit. And those we're more comfortable with working with, and we're happy to support our students sending transcripts to these people. But some agencies we haven't checked their qualifications, let's say. Yeah.
And I would say be leery of agencies that promise you things that sound like impossible promises. If someone says they can guarantee you admissions into a specific university, that's a big guarantee, and I would be leery of that.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to our audience questions now. So the first one comes from Antoinette Lee, who asks, how important is participation in summer programs at universities? Because I know some universities claim it shows kind of, commitment to that institution, and they take that into consideration in your application, and then other institutions think it's kind of nothing as far as the actual university application goes. So what are our opinions on this?
I think in some ways it's what you make of that summer course. If you use it as a real opportunity to maybe connect with lecturers there, find out more, make good connections, follow up, correspond, I think it depends on how much you make of that opportunity and how you can work it. So you'd want a good summer program that gives you those kind of connections. You know, it's the difference between being in Cambridge University and staying in their halls, maybe to, you know, being on the outskirts of Cambridge and maybe just going past it in a bus tour one day. So I think, you know, research, it's important to look in how good is the course, what are the connections, can your student really make the most out of that summer program?
I think it also shows demonstrated interest, which can be a considered factor in admissions, although less so now, I think, than it has been in the past. I think that some people view a summer program at a specific university as a ticket into that university, and I don't think that's really accurate at the most prestigious universities. At others, yes, maybe, but not at the most prestigious ones.
And then I think also some are people organized or rented a room in, let's say, Cambridge, and they're saying, oh, this summer program is in Cambridge. But so you have to, again, do your research. What kind of summer program is it? Is it run by actual Cambridge professors, or who's running the program?
Are there any differences, again, between sort of US, UK, Australia, or is it literally just each individual institution you need to check?
I think it's more individual. I don't think there's like a summer program application bank that I've ever been introduced to.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is from Anil, who writes, my daughter is undecided at the moment, and so she's wondering if she takes maths standard level at the start of 11th grade, would that limit her options in terms of a major?
I think we need to know if that's math, SL, AA, or AI, and what country. So for example, Canada doesn't, for their science course and their business course, don't take IB, SL, math, AI for those subjects. So we'd need a bit more information to answer him.
I think a really good thing would be to contact the universities that you're thinking about and just email them with that question. And I think you'll get some good information that way.
And many universities have that right online. You don't even have to email. You can just look it up. Would it put a limit? Yes. But is that a limit that she would put on herself anyway? Maybe. So it might not matter.
Okay. Well, feel free to let us know more information. Next question. Catherine Sakamoto asks, will IGCSE and GCSE scores be taken into account for university applications, or will they only consider IB scores?
It's very interesting for me here because I have one school that doesn't do IGCSE, which is Renaissance College, and one that does. And I see no difference from where they get the students into university places, whether it's in the US, Australia, UK, Hong Kong. So it really is dependent on what's in your application, and yes, your predicted grades for your IB diploma courses will play a major part. How do you guys feel?
I think in general, most universities will look at the last 4 years of high school. If you're looking at more prestigious schools, sometimes they do initial cutoff looking at your IGCSE grades. And some will say, for example, they need at least a C or above in IGCSE or English and math for certain subjects. So in that sense, I would say yes, it's important.
But certainly if a school doesn't have IGCSEs, then they're looking at the IB results, and I found it just as successful.
No worries then.
No worries.
Applications are evaluated based on the context from which the student comes, and so a student is not going to be put in the no pile because they didn't take IGCSE because it wasn't offered at their school. So it's all about the context of where they're coming from.
Next question is from Christina Chung, who asks, I'd like to ask if a student would like to pursue his career in the health sector, is there a difference in choosing an undergraduate program in the US and UK universities?
In the US, medicine is a graduate program, so absolutely, you wouldn't matter what you studied as an undergraduate as long as you took the prerequisite courses for medical school. But other health sector jobs are not graduates. So, for example, nursing or occupational therapy, you would study that program in order to get in. You would take a nursing course in order to become a nurse. So it would matter. It just kind of depends on where and what the ultimate goal is. And there are loads of job opportunities within the health sector outside of being a doctor or a nurse. So I always encourage students to think of, if you want to be in a helping career, if you want to work in healthcare, consider all of those other opportunities, because it's not just those two things.
A related question. Medicine is the obvious example here, but are there any other sort of specific degrees where applications are more specialized than others, for instance, or require more specific criteria?
I think sometimes in terms of art and design, a lot can really rest on your portfolio and your interview there. So you really need to show your talent as an artist. Similarly with performing arts as well, what you've been able to do and what you've done, can sometimes facilitate a more specialised pathway for a student to get into those types of colleges and universities.
I think computer science is another one that has some pretty specific requirements, math science requirements, as well as do you know a computer language? Have you done some self-taught or taken some extra courses to learn that? So I think that would be one.
Catherine DeLude would like to know, how useful is knowing more than 2 languages? Is it especially well regarded by universities?
So when we write references, if they're doing a bilingual diploma, we do point that out because it is harder to do an IB bilingual diploma. And I think if you're thinking past, because we're also careers counselors, we're thinking past just getting into university, if you're in a customer service kind of industry, knowing 2 languages will always be helpful. Just expanding where you can find a job.
Yeah, I think it depends on the career pathway. I was just talking to Eunice at Oldham, Lee and Knee the other day, and she was talking about how important it is for her having first language putonghua for doing law back here in Hong Kong and working for a Hong Kong law firm.
So always something to highlight basically on your application.
I think it's because having a second language gives you that ability to think in a different way, and I think that is something special and brings a bit of diversity in terms of you working with a team.
Franz Rossler would like to know, does the university offer discounts for any online lessons? Are we aware of any?
I've heard universities say they're not doing any discounts. They might be keeping the same tuition fee as last year, but I think because pretty much they're paying professors and everyone, and everything's going to cost the same. So I've heard from one university, they just said we're keeping the same price, and that's what it's going to be.
So I have children who are recently out of university, and both of them took online courses as part of their degree programs, and tuition was the same. In fact, for one of my children, we had to pay an extra online fee for an online course. So I don't foresee universities saying.
So it might cost even more.
It could. I hope not. I don't think under these circumstances it would, but it certainly, I would be very surprised if the university offered a discount.
Okay. Sean Zhuang would like to ask, how do you see the University of California's decision to scrap exams such as SATs?
I think it's a very interesting decision, and it could be a path that universities could be moving in. I mean, this is conjecture at the moment, but I think there is certainly coming out from educationalists like Young Zhao and a number of others, is this desire in some ways to move away from examination-based systems, moving more towards portfolio-type transcripts for students. Because when you leave a school, you don't do exams anymore. You don't tend to, I guess, Douglas, in your work here, did they come up to you last week and say, well, that was an A- what you did with that interview there? It doesn't happen that way anyway. So I think there is a movement. I think it's one shift at the moment. I think for the moment, university is still going to be interested in grade, but I think it could be a future trend that we see.
Just for viewers then who aren't aware, University of California, so what, they're not accepting any SAT scores? They're not looking at those? How are they?
And they're going to be developing their own in the next few years.
Okay.
Their own standardized test. I personally am quite happy.
It's a good move then.
It's a good move because students are so much more than a number, and I think what they do in high school is a much better predictor of their success at university than what they do on a Saturday morning in a room full of nervous, stressed out peers.
Yeah, I would agree. I think from looking at our counselor forums, everyone's quite happy and cheering for the cancellation of some of the schools letting students not have to take these exams.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Catherine has another question. She would like to know, do we recommend that students start by living on campus resident, or do you think it's better they go find an apartment with roommates?
I think initially, and this happens for most international students, that they're allocated a place, usually on campus or in one of the residences. I think that's a good start, so you get a feel for the place, you get to know which of the areas you want to move into, a little bit more about those areas, which ones to avoid, because of crime. It's just some things that you don't really pick up when you're outside the country. So I think it's a good step forward in terms of finding out more and finding out about the people that you might want to share with. I mean, usually you'll get together with some friends in the first year and then decide to share a house somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's a safety net. If you're hurt, there's someone to help you get to a clinic. If you're sick, there's someone to call your mom and ask what to do. If you don't know where to get your laundry done, there's probably a washing machine somewhere. So especially for students, I mean, this is their first time on their own. For many Hong Kong students, it's going to be their first time without someone helping them with everything in terms of cooking and doing laundry and things like that. So I think it's really important for students to live on campus. It's a nice transition into independence.
Wang Tiong Lu would like to ask, do we think that whether some US universities will exempt students from the requirement of SAT scores given the current situation?
Some have already. They have said not required.
And I think that's what we were talking about with the UC schools. They've already said it won't be required for the next 4 years.
Do you think that'll grow in number depending on the situation in America with the pandemic?
It was growing before the pandemic, so I would suspect it will continue to grow. I think what universities will find out over the next 4 years is that the students they admit are well qualified, are being very successful on their campus, even though they came without that test score. So maybe looking for other ways of evaluating academic preparedness, but not necessarily. That could be one way to demonstrate it, but there might be other ways as well.
Bharati Munshi says she has a son starting year 7 this coming August, and he's thinking of going into coding, and he's developed a few games and some websites during the current lockdown, and he's good at tennis too, but she's not sure how she can help guide him and help him. So she wants to know what extra does he need to get into a top university?
I think he's got a strong interest, and it sounds like an ability at the moment. I think seeing how that develops, supporting that. I mean, there seems to be something great that would already go on a personal statement at the moment. So I think they're working in the right direction there. Could be maybe getting some advice, making some connections with some tech companies here in Hong Kong. Maybe some opportunities to do some work experience a bit later, and maybe being able to talk to some people in the industry as well, find out a bit more about it, their story, what they did to get involved in that and start up a coding company.
And it sounds like her son might be able to tell her what he needs support in next to learn. Like if it's something that's paid, then I think he sounds like he's really smart, and he'll be able to tell her, Mom, I want to learn this next. Can you pay for this course or put me in this camp?
And also keeping in mind that when I was 12 years old, I wanted to be a ballet dancer. And so interests changed. people grow in different ways. So just because that's what he's interested in now, allowing him the opportunity to explore and expand. He may still be very interested in computers and gaming and programming by the time he's 17 or 18 years old, but he could also be interested in something completely different. So giving him the space to explore, I think, is important as well.
So he doesn't need any extra guidance, you would say, at this stage?
Maybe not guidance, but
exposure maybe is a better word.
Yeah.
To a wider array of sort of activities, hobbies, subjects?
Or even in what he's interested in. So, I mean, there are always programs going on in the city for kids who are particularly interested in tech or learning new computer languages or developing apps. And it sounds like he might already know a lot of that. So just helping him move on to the next step of that, I think.
Could be interesting seeing connections as well, that interest in tennis. Is there any connection you can make there in terms of apps that would connect with that? Because that would certainly connect two important areas in his life together.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. Catherine says she has 2 children at ESF in years 10 and 8. She would like to know, when do you start talking to students about university choices, applications, and the various programs on offer?
So I could start with my school. In year 10, we start talking to the kids, just thinking about careers. We give them a bit of fun activities, explore. We do a quick quiz, and sometimes they give them funny careers like wall tiling, but we tell them to think, okay, why do you think they give you a career of wall tiling? So probably you said you like to work with your hands. You don't want to sit at a desk all day when you answered the quiz, and just starting to think about what kind of career might I like. And then we work with them all the way until year 13.
We start in year 10 too. Our year 10 students are currently preparing for their World of Work experience, which will happen in year 11, and we've been doing lessons with them. We meet with students individually as they're making their course choices for going into the full diploma program or career-related program. So it's kind of ongoing, but it definitely ramps up in years 12 and 13.
I think both our schools do work experience and the careers fair for as we move up into just the core of the application bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly our counsellor's office doesn't have a notice on the door that says no year 8 students. They're open to all the students, and they're more than happy. Counsellors are more than happy for students to drop in and ask questions at break time, lunch times. These guys are great at communicating with students and providing advice. And I think it's something to start thinking about, as long as it doesn't cause you to become anxious, but you really start to think about what different opportunities are out there. So many courses at universities now, there's a great wide choice, and I think the sooner you engage, the better, in terms of just finding out what's there, thinking about it, how does it match your interest, how does it match your abilities.
Is starting year 10 standard for most international schools in Hong Kong, would you say? Particularly for those parents who don't have children at ESF.
I'm not sure I can speak for other schools.
I'm not sure I could. I think most would be starting at least by year 10. Some might be starting younger. I mean, in a perfect world, we would start talking about this when they enter secondary school, or even down as in primary school, but
Bit early.
bit early.
Okay.
Certainly from the schools that I've worked in, it has been year 10 when I've been in Taipei and Singapore.
Okay. Got one more question from Catherine Grix, who asks, for UK universities, how widely accepted are extended diplomas, specifically engineering? Are they still classed as inferior to A-levels?
BTEC extended diplomas are very well recognised in UK universities. It really shows a high degree of specialism, and it is a very rigorous course, and it's often matched maybe with some of the courses, IB diploma courses, sometimes not, depending on how much time is devoted to that course. We have a great programme at West Island School. It's an extended diploma in engineering, and it's got students into the right universities where they want to pursue engineering, and good universities for studying engineering.
Well, that's all we've got time for today. So thank you, panelists, for joining us, and for the English Schools Foundation for their support. ESF will be at SCMP's Kindergarten Festival on June 20th at the JW Marriott, where they'll be sharing insights on an education worth having in kindergartens. We hope to see you there. And lastly, thank you for the audience for joining us online and for your questions, and hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar and event. Goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.